Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me for another great conversation. As always, I appreciate you guys. My next guest was a pleasure to talk to. She defines community. She does things that most people say they're gonna do but don't do. She gives back to the community. She's outspoken when it comes to minorities and what's happening in this country. She's a teacher, and she has a really amazing definition of what mutual aid is supposed to be. I introduce to you guys the incredibly humble and incredibly active Maria Ravelli. All right, Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. I still find it, very amazing that we can just reach out to people on the internet nowadays and have them not only respond
Yeah.
to you, but be willing to give up their time to hang out with you and talk to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Everything's online now, so I feel like I just live on a computer screen at this point.
Oh, yeah, it's good and bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. So before we get into everything with the Worcester Community Fridges, which I'm gonna tell you, like I told my wife to reach out to you because I don't use social media, but I was like, look, I have to talk to Maria because for some reason I woke up that morning, I was super anxious. I was kind of having a rough morning, my usual doom scrolling through Twitter, and
Yeah.
then this Telegram article pops up, and it's about this network of fridges which I've never heard about, and I really want to get into that. But please let the listeners know more about you first.
Hi. So my name is Maria. I'm a teacher. I teach kindergarten through first grade at the Fitzgerald Institute in Northborough, so like a little bit outside of Worcester. Um, that's kind of it. I'm like a plant mom,
Yeah.
clearly. I have a son. He's almost 4. Yeah, there's really not too much.
No, that's great. So you definitely spend a lot of time around kids then, like younger kids.
Yeah, I'm like
Okay.
constantly around children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
was that something you've always wanted to do, or did you kind of just end up there, or how did that work out?
No, so my mom's a teacher, and I just like always just like like I don't know if it's like aging myself, but like we used to go to like take your child to work day. I
Oh
don't do
yeah.
you like did you ever do that? Yeah. So like
Yeah,
I used to go
absolutely.
there, and my mom worked for like underserviced schools in like the special ed classroom. So
Okay.
she was really like in it. And I would just go, and I remember just like hanging out with these kids and hearing their stories because I'm like also a kid at that time.
Yeah.
And I think at that point is like kind of when that started to like radicalize me and be like, whoa, I'm like, I can touch so many lives just like having conversations with people. So that was kind of that leading force that like got me into teaching,
Yeah.
was just like, I need a job where I can like constantly be around people that are curious about the world, and just like naturally that's children.
Yeah.
So it was definitely
Good
like a
point.
methodical plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So you went to school for it, I take it, after you found that this is what you wanted
Yeah.
to do?
Yeah, so I worked in the autism field for a while. And then once I had my son, I was kind of in that point where I was like, okay, well, I need to figure out, like, I guess, what kind of schooling I want him to go to as well. And then I found this amazing school called the Fitzgerald Institute in Northborough.
Yeah.
And it's just like a total, like, child centered program. And they offered me to be able to bring my son to go to the preschool program. And then they offered me a job as the kindergarten teacher there. Um,
Sweet. That's a
so
rare
definitely like the
opportunity.
universe aligned for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually would like to, since you brought up working with autism kids, my son is actually autistic. How was your experience working with autistic kids?
I loved it. It was one of the most like incredible experiences for me because I think there's such a stigma with children with autism, and I worked specifically for children that didn't communicate with language.
Okay.
So for me, just yeah, so just to be able to kind of like I guess like see their truest selves, and kind of like break that stigma, because so many people think that if you're diagnosed with autism, and especially if you're like nonverbal, like not a language communicator,
Yeah.
you're kind of put in this weird box. And these children are like so powerful, they're so capable, and we live in
Absolutely.
like such an ableist society where people see anybody that has any type of disability or anybody that's like different, and they're immediately like, oh, there's not too much that that person can achieve. And that's like the opposite of children with autism. They are like powerhouses for what they set their mind to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know, as a parent, that's not
Yeah.
always like the thing that you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's like the
Absolutely.
most powerful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I always like, I agree with you 1,000%. I always like to say that I'm envious of the artist mind because it seems to focus in like laser sharp, and
Hmm.
it seems to do, at least for my son's case, what I wish I could do, and that's block out the world. right? Like
Yeah.
he's the happiest
It,
camper. He just likes his things, and as long as you don't touch those things, he's all set. He doesn't care what's happening in the world. He doesn't care about the hate. He doesn't care about anything.
yeah,
I envy that. It's incredible.
it's a superpower.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, all right, so this is an easy transition into the Worcester Community Fridges. So it obviously seems that you're dedicated to selfless act, right? You're all about helping people out. So how?
Yeah.
Okay, did I get that wrong?
No, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I think it's mutual. I think it's like mutual aid, right? So it's like not necessarily like helping people out, but just being like a human being in a community, and
I love
that's
that.
just what like humans do.
Yeah, that's actually I've never thought about it that way. That's actually
Yeah.
a very distinct difference. Yeah. Okay. So fast forward me from where you went from, how did Worcester Community Fridges come up? Is this like a new idea? Did you make this up? Has anybody ever done this before?
No, so this is actually like a super popular thing. It started in
Oh, okay.
Germany like a while ago, and it's very popular in Europe. And then just over like the last year, because of the pandemic and just because of the crisis, the hunger crisis that's happened in the last year because of job loss and things like that, we started seeing them a lot in like major cities in the United States. So there's a bunch in Boston, there's a bunch in like Cambridge, there's one in like Fenway. And then there's another organization in Worcester that's been trying to pilot one as well, I think since like last fall. And I was just like, I'm the type of person where it's like, I can't relax to the point of like, I can't just like block out the world. If I see that there's like something, and if something sparks in my mind, probably
Yeah.
similar to like your son, if something sparks in my mind, I'm like, I'm gonna do absolutely everything until this gets done.
Nice.
So that's what it was. I was just like sitting on my sofa one day. Yeah, I was like, Worcester needs a community fridge. How are we gonna make this happen? And then like within 2 weeks, things just started like falling together. And we have our first one that's gonna be in Worcester. We have an unveiling at the end of the month.
So walk me through a community fridge because I didn't know it was a thing. Actually, that article the other day was the first time I've even heard of such a thing. So how does this work? How does a community fridge work?
So it's like literally exactly what it sounds. We're plopping a physical fridge like down in the middle of Main South in Worcester, and it's a give what you can and take what you need. So we partner with farms and restaurants, and we encourage local community members to drop off food in this fridge. And then anybody that needs access to this food, they're able to just go in there and grab it. It's open 24/7, so that's kind of what makes us sets us different from like a food bank, for example, because
Okay.
a lot of food banks, their hours are kind of like restrictive, or a lot of like undocumented residents too. They're like worried to go to these places that require some type of ID. So there's just a lot of barriers that get in the way for everybody to be able to access food. So by putting just like a fridge in the middle of the community, there's like no barriers in the way. People can go in there 24/7. They take what they need. They leave what they can.
So it sounds like it pretty much runs on the trust system.
It is. It's the trust system. And I think so. I'm a big believer in like trusting your community. I think especially under resourced neighborhoods are so stigmatized for like violence, and especially unsheltered people. Media and police and things like that have kind of put this stigma that like these people can't be trusted, or these people have like mental health issues that are going to make them like violent or whatever
Yeah,
it is. And
yeah,
that's just not the case with humans. Humans aren't like naturally disposed to being violent.
yeah.
So yeah, it's just giving people what they need and hoping that we can feed people.
Now, when somebody would hear the motto of Worcester, right, and they say it's the heart of Massachusetts, on the outside it seems like, well, the heart of Massachusetts, they must be taking care of the heart. It doesn't need much help like this, or it doesn't need these type of services. Why would you disagree with that? Obviously, you do if you started this.
Yeah, not so much that I disagree because there are a lot of resources in Worcester, but again, there's a lot of things. So I'm a first generation immigrant. My parents came here. My mom's Peruvian, my stepdad's Cuban. So I kind of walked through the process when I was really young of them becoming citizens in America, and it's not easy.
Yeah,
Having to like do a lot of translation and having to kind of navigate that. It's a whole different thing. So there's a lot of families that are worried to access resources because of deportation, and especially in like the last 4 years, because of the stigma that the current leadership placed on immigrants. That fear has definitely risen. So it's not that Worcester is not like adequately resourced. It's just that we're putting that resource right in the hands of the people that need it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I grew up in I don't know. Are you from Worcester? I never
So
asked
I'm
you.
actually originally from Miami.
Okay.
I moved to Worcester like a little less than 10 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. So I grew up in one of the lower poverty areas, Great Brook Valley. It's actually much better off now than it was when I was growing up. But I agree with you 1,000%. I think it was extremely difficult to be able to consistently put, food on the table safely, like without having to fall into the temptation of drugs and all that stuff. And I don't believe, at least my parents could probably correct me on this, I don't believe there was resources like this at the time. I think
Yeah,
you
and
just relied on food stamps, pretty much.
yeah, and you know what? To be honest, too, there is a stigma, especially in the Spanish community. At least I experienced it growing
Sure.
up with accessing welfare.
Yeah.
Growing up, my mom, even if we had $0 coming in, would not access food stamps, would not, do government programming, that kind of thing. I think it's just a pride thing associated with our culture.
Yeah.
But on
Agreed.
on top of that too, a lot of the programs that are there, or a lot of like these food banks and things like that, they're amazing. But the kind of food that they're serving these families, and I'm sure there's a bunch of resources that are probably doing this. But like as a Spanish person, I want Spanish food in my house. Or if I was like from an Asian family, I would want access to like Asian food so that I can cook the things that my family is comfortable cooking. I don't necessarily only want access to like rice and canned products and the things that
Right.
are typical for like a food bank.
Yeah.
And community fridges are cool too because we're partnering with local farms, so we're putting fresh produce in these fridges. It's not just things that you would get at a food bank, it's like things that you would get at a grocery store. I'm a big believer that like food should not be capitalized on. I think it's
Yeah.
disgusting, and I wrote that in like that Google
I
form that you
did.
gave
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. I want to get into that. I do want to get into
Yeah,
that.
it's disgusting that we live in a world where the things that we need to survive are being capitalized on, right? Like money, housing, clothing, like all of these things are just basic necessities of human life. But because we live in this society that kind of puts profit over people,
Yeah.
if you don't have the money to get food, you starve. Like that doesn't make sense to me. So
Yeah, and there's always the people that combat that too. The people that will say, "Well, there's enough help that's going around. There's enough welfare going around," but I've always found that the people that say that just don't have their ear to the ground, right? They don't know somebody who's
yeah.
struggling, in that nature. So, what do you think the current state of? I mean, I know, like you said, as somebody who's not a citizen, they can't necessarily just walk in and get welfare. But for those that are able to get welfare, and now that it's not so much just can related stuff, and you can actually, like, I guess, go grocery shopping, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. How do you feel about the current welfare system? You think it's doing enough? You think it's still underserving people?
I mean, I think it's doing enough. To be completely honest, I'm not like too familiar with the
Gotcha.
welfare like system, especially in like Massachusetts. So I don't want to speak too much on that. But I also want to say that there is like the stigma against welfare,
Yeah.
and this is like because there's so many farmers and because there's such a surplus of production in like grocery stores and restaurants and things like that. The community itself could definitely be doing a lot more if we were resourced and like motivated to do that. And I think things like community fridges motivate restaurants to just put like leftovers inside of this fridge, because if you're on welfare and if you're on like all of these government programs and things like that, you're
Yeah.
also limited on the things that you can purchase.
True.
And that's kind of another thing too that's like motivating me to do the food fridge, because you can have access. So let's say you have your welfare, you do your food stamps, whatever, and you have access to like your basic staples of feeding your family, right? What if like I want to bake cookies with my kid one day? Like just because I live below the poverty line doesn't mean that I shouldn't have access to those experiences with my children.
True.
So I should be able to be like, you know what? Yeah, let's make a box of brownies or whatever. There's so many underserviced children that don't have like these typical experiences or these typical things that are like so normalized if you're financially privileged in a house.
Right.
So we want to be able to like put those experiences in these families' hands using food.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And as I'm hearing you tell me these things, also the community aspect. If you rely on government assistance, you're missing out on that whole community aspect,
Yeah,
as well as the at-home stuff.
yeah, or just like as especially now as a parent, when my son was first born, we were definitely not in like a financially comfortable situation. So
Sure.
there were definitely times where we were looking at our grocery bill and it was like to the dollar of like, okay, what is
Yeah.
it exactly that we need? And I think a community fridge is going to give people access to things that they want, right? Because
Yeah.
that's giving people like an additional motivation to live. If I was a mom and I had like a really crappy week, and I know I'm going to go home and like see my kid eating the same box of ramen for the fifth night in a row, but I'm coming home with a box of cookies, that's going to make my kids weak. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean? Like that's going to just, and as a parent, that's going to motivate me too, to like work harder and to like do all of these things. So definitely, like, again, just putting that in the people's hands directly.
That's awesome. So, and you're obviously with, selfless direction leads to good results, it sounds like. So, why then in this world, in your opinion, of course, because I don't think there's one answer to this, why is the world so selfish? If it's obvious that being selfish is the winning route.
Yeah, capitalism
Yeah,
is like the
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a mix of capitalism and white supremacy are like the two evils in this country. It's
Yeah.
what our country, and I don't know if your listeners will think that's like super radical or whatever, but those
That's they don't dictate what happens on the show. So please,
yeah,
yeah.
those are the two roots of evil in everything, and everything kind of boils down to those two things.
Yeah.
Capitalism puts this extra divide against people. There's a reason why we don't know our neighbors anymore, right? There's a reason why we're always comparing to other people on social media. There's a reason why we're always wanting to have a raise, wanting to go on a vacation, wanting to like have a vacation from the current life that we're living in. And it's capitalism. That's like the evil of everything.
Yeah, the chase of money. Yeah.
It's the chase of money. It's your constant comparing to the person next door.
Yeah.
You have to think about it. Just a couple hundred years ago, we weren't living like this, right? The way that we're living now, this constant chase for money, this constant chase for competition, this isn't normal. So our human brains have not caught up to the development of the state that we're currently living in.
Yeah.
That's why there's a rate of depression. That's why there's such a high rate of poverty, such a high rate of anxiety. All of these mental illnesses boil down to the fact that the way that we're currently living, our human brains are not wired to live this way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like to go to the obvious example of that, which is that our parents lived in a world where they were getting headlines one at a time. Maybe they'll sit down at 5 o'clock and eat dinner and watch the news and catch a few
Yeah.
headlines. And now, exactly like my example the other day where I found about the food fridges, now we seem to have those terrible headlines and those narrative changes second per second. And if you do a good job of staying away from it, the other person that's surrounding your life may not do such a good job of slowing it down. So yeah, it's information overload, and I agree with you. I don't know when we'll ever get used to it. But capitalism, huh? You boil it all down to capitalism.
It's all capitalism and white supremacy. And I can go off on that. That's like the thing that
Yeah,
I'm most passionate about, to be completely honest.
yeah.
But those two things are just like the root of all evil, and everything kind of boils down to that.
So white supremacy, I do want to talk about that. That's obviously a topic nowadays. We're actually, arguably seeing it, literally firsthand. Um, what could be done about this, and why, in your opinion, and, to the people that say that it's not actually a thing, what do you say to those people?
I mean, I don't know, like open your eyes, wake up, like don't
Yeah,
be
they don't
ignorant.
like that
It,
though.
and you know what? We historically, and it's
Yeah,
so hard too, because those people, their entire life has been colonized for white comfort, right?
sure.
If you went through our education system, the history that you received was adapted and modified so that America looks superior, right? Like all of these different bits of information that we've received to form our opinion has been like perfectly curated to believe that America is superior, that white people are superior, all of these things. So unless you're actively getting your information from other sources, or just me, I'm a brown woman in America. Like I was radicalized from birth,
Yeah,
I was radicalized seeing my mom struggling, working 3 jobs, cleaning hotel rooms, like going to school with her so that she can get her teaching degree. Like those kinds of experiences radicalized me. And if you didn't experience that, then you need to be doing the work and accessing that information elsewhere. You need to be actively listening to Black and Brown and Indigenous activists and hear what they're actually saying. And if you're like listening to those people and it's not resonating with you, then you need to like dig deeper. Because I mean, I'm pretty, my family's pretty active as far as like going to protests and things like that. And I
yeah,
remember my first protest I went to when I was like late teenager. hearing these people speak, you can't put yourself in that situation and then leave there with the same mindset, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of up to the person to start accessing that information. I'm done with excuses. I'm done with people being like, it doesn't
Yeah.
exist. We're past that.
Yeah, it's getting definitely dangerous. I had to use the same term you're using, radicalize myself when I was older, and not so much because I was blind, but more because my parents did such a fantastic job of covering it up for me.
Yep.
So I have a slightly little bit different because I am Puerto Rican, and we kind of get like the green light when it comes to coming into this country, right?
Mhm.
We're not equal citizens, but we are citizens nonetheless, and we're able to come here and kind of not have to do the citizenship stuff and all that. So my parents, I did see them struggle. I did see them going through, obviously we grew up in poverty, we grew up in the ghetto, but they did such a good job of just explaining to me that this is just the way things are. This is just, part of your life. This is what you're gonna have to do. And it wasn't until I got older till I realized that, wait a minute, that's not the case for everybody though. It's only the
Yeah.
case for, us.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think, I mean, my parents are kind of the same way, right? Where they like did a really, like in my childhood, I was like, wow, like I'm a princess. I live
Yeah.
luxuriously. I get what I need. And it wasn't until I grew up and again, like kind of opened my eyes and, moved out of Florida and that kind of stuff where I was like, they did like a really nice job of covering things up. But I
Yeah.
think that goes to that speaks on what that generation believes. Like that generation that immigrated to this country like between the 60s and 80s, they kind of feel like that's their payment of coming in this country is that they're
Right.
going to be oppressed and they have to go through the struggle to achieve this American quote unquote American dream, right?
Yeah.
That they feel like I came to this country, I'm choosing this struggle. And that's not accurate. Like, if you are a Hispanic person, so I'm Peruvian, this land is mine. I am owed the things that are on this land. If you are Puerto Rican, this land is yours. You are owed the things that are on this land. And it's not about the struggle anymore. It's not about that. It is now about taking the power out of the people's hands that have had it and withheld it for so long, and now putting it in the hands of the working class and the people that are actually making this country run on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's the thing too. While we're telling ourselves that we're offered the opportunity to be here, we're the ones that are providing the most value.
Exactly. Like I remember hearing all this when I was like younger, um about like, oh, immigrants, they're going to take your job and they're going to do all of this stuff, and it's like, no. Like
Yeah,
it's not, that's not the way it works. But again, those are just the lies that we were fed, to kind of uphold this like entire facade that this country is based on.
yeah, I agree. And this is gonna be very loose because you're giving it very upright. I'm gonna give it very loose. We also bring the sauce. Like,
Period.
yeah, it's one
Yes.
of those things where I don't know if you watch The Office. Most people do. Well,
Yeah.
there's an episode where Dwight opens up the gym, right, and then he's like, well, the key to this is you get the black people to do it first. Then you
Yep.
stop the black people from doing it, and then the white people will come, and then you stop the black people from doing it, and that's how you successfully,
Yeah.
and that's just the value we bring, the culture,
That's
right?
the pattern, but that's the pattern from day one, right?
Yeah,
That's the pattern from when the colonizers came to this country. They didn't come and bringing their own culture, right? They stole and they killed the culture of the indigenous people that were already here. The same exact thing happened with slavery, right? And especially with like with black culture in America, we do this on an absolute daily basis. Culture in this country would not exist if it wasn't for black people.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's time that we start paying up and giving ownership to that.
Yeah, I agree. I have I'm been really for the last few years, but definitely since October, been into Bitcoin. And
My husband too. It's a lot.
it's addicting. It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about it is that what I keep telling my wife when I keep telling other people is that now the culture is getting involved.
Hmm.
When the culture gets involved, it becomes really cool.
Hmm.
Now I don't know who like came up with the terms. I don't know if it was a white guy, a black guy. It doesn't matter. But like it used to be, hey, get Bitcoin. Now it's like stacking sats, right? So
Mm.
now it's like, hey, go use your Cash App card and go to McDonald's and stack some sats. That's very saucy and that's very addicting because then it's like, oh, even if I don't get the techie stuff of Bitcoin and why I need it or not, I want to do it because it sounds cool to do.
Yeah. And
And
you and And it's
But
the same thing with our fridge too. We're building a culture around the fridge. We have an artist that's involved, a local artist that's designing the fridge for us. We have community members that are coming. It's in the building that it's in. I don't know if you're familiar with the Main South area,
I
but
am.
it's in the same building as a pizza place that's been there for years and a radio station that's like absolutely just beautified with art on the side of it.
Yep.
Like there's such a cultural aspect that comes into our community fridge, and I think it's that, right? It's like
Yeah.
we're bringing the sauce when it comes to putting food in people's hands.
Absolutely, and we should be paid out for that. Not not in literal cash, but we should be respected for that. And yeah, I agree with you. That's super interesting. So, the fridge, there's no employees here. It's just a trust thing. You go in, you go out. Because Maine
Yeah.
South is a very rough area. I'm sure you know that.
You know
Yes
what?
and
I
no.
think, huh?
Yes and no on Maine South.
I think so. I think it depends again on your perception of rough, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of grew up um, not always living in like super nice areas until like my stepdad came and we went to the suburbs, and I was like, oh,
Yeah, yeah, I
like
agree with
this
that.
is, yeah, exactly. So if you grow up in these communities, you don't live in a dangerous community. Like we know we are in this community. We know the people that are going to be using this fridge. I know the volunteers. Like we're just part of it, right? And if you're part of a community, you don't fear it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was talking more in the sense of security, right? Like if you have Main South is a lot of drug addicts and stuff. You don't want nobody abusing it, but that would be why it's a trust thing, right? You're just trusting the community to do well with it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's food, right? It's not like I'm filling it with like weapons and things
Yeah,
like that.
gold.
I'm filling it with food. So if a person is abusing food, then that means that person really needs food,
Good point.
right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
nobody's opening the fridge and being like, I'm gonna take all this just to be a bad person. Like
yeah.
you're taking these things probably because you're really food insecure. And if you need to take everything in the fridge to fill your fridge at home, I got you. I will fill that fridge again.
I love
Like,
that.
do not worry about it. Yeah.
I love that. Super cool. All right. So you got the one opening on Main South, and there's another one, correct?
So we're actually in the process right
Okay.
now of trying to find different host locations. So Worcester Community Fridges is hoping to open 5 free food fridges by the end of the year. We have so much community support. So right now we're just looking for host locations where we
Okay.
can start plopping them down.
Okay. So five in the works, one for sure. When's the one in Main South coming up? Opening?
January 31st. It's on a Sunday. We're doing like a little grand opening at 11 a.m. Um,
Okay.
910 Main Street. Yeah, we're just asking for people to come if they want to come to bring a food donation.
Yeah.
And then it'll be open from there on out and it'll be running.
Okay. And you keep saying we, so this is obviously not just you. Is there other people partaking in this, or are you're the spearhead of
Yeah,
it though?
so we have volunteers that
Okay.
are going to be helping maintain it. I've been reaching. So the interesting thing about community aid, and I think one of like the many blessings of this pandemic in general, it's really taught me how much you can impact by sitting on your sofa just trolling on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Like
Give me more.
just
How does that work?
yeah, like just in 2 weeks from me sitting on my sofa at the end of the day, I've been able to connect with so many people through social media.
Yeah.
So all I'm doing is just like connecting the dots of people that have been wanting to give. Um, but so I say we as in like the collective community.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, but we do have people. My husband's been helping me organize. We have like different farms that I've been helping. Like everybody's just been kind of like willing to give. So when I say we, I just mean like everyone.
The collection. Yeah. You're
The
extremely
collection,
proactive
yeah,
though. Yeah.
yeah,
Like it does. Social media that you say that. First of all, it takes an extremely proactive person to do what you've done in the matter of weeks, like you said. But I do get your point. It's that easy if you just put your mind to it. Social
yeah.
media, though, how do you do with social media? And the reason I ask that is because for those that are listening, my wife had to reach out to you because I tapped out of social media. And what I mean by tap out is I'm okay with admitting to myself that I just don't do well in those arenas.
Hmm.
But on the
Why?
other hand, huh?
Why do you think you don't do well with it?
Because the monkey mind likes to get away from itself, right? And just it's designed to do that. And then, like a sucker, I basically fall for it. So what I mean is it's very easy for a really good day of mine to get derailed by something I see on social media.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people, like my wife, that are whatever. Oh, I saw it. I scroll by. It's fine. I go to the next thing. Or their algorithm is triggered to basically see only what they want to see. But me, for some reason, Yeah, I just, I don't have to have an opinion on everything, but for some reason my brain runs to an opinion on everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of honestly, I think I'm kind of similar. And for me, when I get something stuck in my head, like the community fridges thing, that's something I was
Yeah.
looking at. I saw it on social media. I researched what it is,
Yep.
and then I was like, okay, let's do it. Like I have a very like active brain, I think, when it comes
Yeah.
to those kinds of things. So when I see something on social media that just kind of like resonates with me, it's not necessarily something that I can like scroll past. So I guess it's kind
Right.
of the same for me.
But yeah, that's why I
But
bring it up because I feel I'm missing opportunities to not only meet people and get ideas and stuff like that, but I also try to prioritize the fact that I have to live inside this head, right? So
mhm.
it's cool if I go in and find the next best thing, but I had to figure it. But yes, I'm missing opportunities, and as you are using it as a tool to leverage your ideas and your passions and stuff like that, I'm missing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me too, it like motivates me. Like my Instagram feed is really curated, like you said, for me, right? The algorithm just like works that it puts a lot of
Yeah,
like Black Lives Matter content, stuff that I'm really passionate about, a lot of like
yeah,
social justice content. So I'll like see those things and that stuff like motivates me.
gotcha.
So I think it's just kind of all about like the way that you're interacting with the things that are on there.
Right.
Yeah, like I don't have like any of that like Fitspo stuff or like the vacation envy. Like I don't see any of that content that's on my screen. My stuff
Yeah.
is like all like social justice, like radical transformations of like communities and stuff.
Super cool. Yeah, maybe I got to go back and try it again. I still have
Yeah, just
Twitter.
like rearrange it.
Yeah, I have Twitter. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
People will probably hear this podcast will get tired of me saying it, but I've always just kind of been the kid that watches the cool kids and say, "Oh, I see what you guys are up to. I don't want no part of that." Like I'll sit over
Yeah.
here. It's okay. I'm not missing anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely got to do that. So can we talk about go back a little bit and talk about the state of the things? How did you feel about because it's obviously related to white supremacy and everything? How do you feel about the insurrection? Whatever the sixth or last Wednesday.
Yeah, so I actually just watched there's like a cool kind of like docu series that's happening on Hulu. I think it's called like the 20, did you see it? It's called like the
No, I don't have a.
24. It's so good because so I was watching it in live time. So I'm a teacher and during that time I was remote learning when it was like actively happening.
Wow.
So the second it hit 3 o'clock, I like logged off because my phone was blowing up.
Yeah.
I logged off and was just sitting in front of my screen. It's I mean, what do you say to that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just that was like the purest form of white supremacy that was like happening in our very eyes in real time, and the president of the United States couldn't call it by its name again, right? Like time
Yeah.
over time. And to be quite honest, like I'm at the point too, and I don't know if this is like a super like political podcast, but I'm
It's
at the
fine.
point where if you are continuing to make excuses for the leadership that we had in place, I don't want any part of that because you're not going to aid in my vision of what I need this community to look like. So I've been cutting off family. I've cut off friends. My
Yeah.
friend list has like been chopped in half. I have no room for any of that anymore. I have educated to the point of exhaustion. And if you are not listening to me while I'm educating you for free, then you're cut.
Yeah. I've had similar situations and similar turmoil. I haven't cut certain individuals. I'm still big on everybody should experiences should determine what they feel. But I do agree with you that there was a lot of things that played out that day that are just obvious, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
the, the most obvious one is that there would have been a lot more dead people there if there were minorities, if there were black people, trying to take over the Capitol, or if there were any
Yep.
brown people trying to take over the Capitol, and just the fact that that didn't happen to me. Never mind all the stuff that happened afterwards. The fact that they were allowed to trample through, quote unquote sacred grounds. I say quote unquote because they are just buildings at the end of the day. But the
Yeah.
fact that they were able to do that and do that without being bothered, without being tear gassed, without being slowed down, yeah, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah, and you know what? It's not so I'm trying to like sway away from comparing that to Black Lives Matter specifically, and I
Sure.
understand why people do, obviously, because that was kind of like the most recent um protest, right? But I think what happens when we compare it to Black Lives Matter is we are comparing these people to protesters, right? And that's not what that was. But we see this time and time again with white supremacy. We saw it in North Carolina or in Charlottesville, I think it was South Carolina, North Carolina. We saw it there at the beginning of Trump's presidency. We see white supremacy being kind of like looked over
Yeah.
time and time again. So this isn't new. This isn't expected. We could have called this in 2016. Like we knew that this was happening.
Yeah.
But again, I guess back to like to your point of comparing it to Black lives, the country and police in general, like military, they don't see Black and brown bodies as worthy as white people, right? And that's a fact. There's a reason
Yeah.
why they're so hesitant to shoot a white man, but they can pull a trigger on a little Black kid holding a BB gun in a second. So they just don't see them as equal. And that, I think, for me, was the thing that like held most true last week.
Yeah, definitely. It was a different. They were treated differently, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. And now with the police situation, I do agree with you on that sense. I also tell people too that nobody, even if it is a minority and you don't hate the, nobody deserves to be shot 19 times or 30-something times, which you've seen stuff like that. That's not humanistic. But when it comes to the police, how much of that do you think is screening? How much of that is just too easy to become a cop?
Oh, a thousand. I mean, I'm an abolitionist. I feel like at this point you can probably tell I'm like a little radical leftist, but
Yeah, yeah,
I'm an abolitionist. So I don't believe in like police control at all.
yeah,
But I think definitely for like I've had some pretty tough experiences with police officers, and I'm like
yeah.
an extremely white passing woman, right? And
Sure.
I've had experiences with police officers that have completely radicalized me. My husband is white, and
Yeah,
he has also been thrown in the back of a cop car. Like police are just not adequately trained to deal with people, like period.
yeah.
And especially when it comes to minorities, just because there's so much like racial bias that goes in that's in your brain, like unknowingly, right? Like
Yeah.
I have it too. I have a lot of racial bias that I've had to kind of power through and work past just because of the way I was raised. And police have that too. So they are definitely not adequately trained, like at all.
Yeah. Now, the obvious follow-up question to that is: so, how do you feel about the defunding the police? I mean, you're abolitionist. I know that now, so you can get rid of them completely.
Yeah.
But the argument that I try to make is not necessarily defund them, but the system that distributes the money to them needs to be cleaned up. So, better services, longer training, something more of a military thing where you do 6 months away, to get mental help, to get physical help, come back, kind of rotate in and out. But that's going to require money. You can't just defund if you want to do these things. Are you with that, or you just completely screw it?
No, I think defunding is step one, right? That's the fundamental. I think, to be completely honest, in my lifetime, I'll see defunding. I won't see abolition, just because
Yeah,
we're not there yet, right? And I'm not like this daydreamer where I think next. I'm not the type of person where I think, oh, Joe Biden's going to abolish the police and whatever. I'm kind of
yeah,
realistic with that stuff.
right.
But we spend almost $800 billion a year on the defense budget. There's room in there. There's a budget already for it. It's just they're choosing to not put the money where the people are asking. But it's not about we need more money for their resources. They need to allocate their own funds within the defense budget because it's already there.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, you can say anything on this pod. I love my audience, but they know that this is all about human conversation. And I'm never married to my thoughts. And
Yeah.
sometimes I come into these conversations and I walk out completely different. So,
That's cool. Yeah,
uh,
I'm like a pretty passionate person.
yeah, I could
I
tell, and
don't
I
know if
love it.
you can tell,
Fantastic.
yeah, but I mean, so I think once I kind of got into this like rabbit hole of
Yeah,
social justice, I can't see anything else, right? And it applies in my job as well as a teacher. Like, how can I use this thing that I'm really passionate about to, on a daily basis work with children? So now it's kind of like my world revolves around it because it's all I can see. I can like only see injustices, and I can only think like, okay, how am I going to change that next?
yeah. This is an interesting question now that you bring up the kids. Do you get a lot of I use the better term shit, but have you ever gotten any shit from parents for, hey, why are you teaching my kids this stuff? I've always wanted to ask the teacher that question.
Yeah, so I think there's like a stigma that's placed on like teachers that
Okay.
have similar perspectives as me. I'm not going in there and being like, Black Lives Matter, down with the white man. Like, that's just not my thing. But
Yeah,
when children are not, especially with the kids that I work with, they're so young.
yeah,
My favorite thing is like bibliotherapy, which is just looking at books. So I offer them books about people that look different, people in wheelchairs, Black people, brown people, women that are wearing hijabs. Like, I'm just reading these books and their questions naturally arise. And when they do, we dissect their questions. So we were reading a book about a child in a wheelchair, and in that book, the child wasn't able to go into the building because there wasn't a wheelchair ramp. So that led to this amazing conversation about accessibility for the disabled community with kindergarteners. So we are now having
Nice.
these kindergarteners thinking, and a lot of these kids have never experienced somebody in a wheelchair that they're close with, right?
Yeah.
But now they're not going to be able to look at a building that's inaccessible the same way. And so it's not like me directly radicalizing them. It's like us as again, it's a little learning community dissecting the biases that they have as they naturally come up.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Incredible. So, in a different example, just of the ones you hear, what about like the college professors that lose their job because of their takes? Do you think that's more because the professor is enforcing this stuff, or just that stigma that you just spoke about?
Um, I mean, I think people are really sensitive to things
Yeah.
that they don't want to face, right? So I think at the college level, you need to kind of have a little bit thicker skin if you're entering this world of the realities that are there. I not necessarily sugarcoat, but I definitely don't, I'm not as direct with kindergarteners. But if I have a group of 18-year-olds in my classroom that are still not admitting that we live in a world that prioritizes white bodies,
Yeah.
we're going to shut that down because and it's not like they're just saying like, this is my perspective. It's like, no, this is our radical, these are our experiences that we've experienced. Here are research studies that prove it. Here is
Yeah.
years and years of, you know what I mean, like gathered context from other educators. So college professors that are getting fired for the truth, I mean, that's not cool.
Yeah, that's pretty much cancel culture, in a
Yeah.
sense. But the other way, because usually cancel culture is when somebody says something that's not in the popular or not in the norm. And then for, these teachers, it's kind of like they may be saying the truth, they may be saying, the norm, and still getting canceled for that, which is,
Yeah.
which is extremely strange, and losing their job. I always found that very weird.
Yeah. I hope that doesn't happen to me.
No, 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 no. You sound great, and you seem like you have the right agenda, right? You're just bringing awareness to these kids and letting them get to their own conclusions instead of forcing
Yeah.
stuff down their throat, which is
Yeah.
incredible. So where do we go from here, Maria? What do you think? This country's about to go into a really weird week, in my opinion, and what happens? Are you optimistic? Are you,
Um,
saddling up? What's gonna happen in this world?
yeah, I have like my armor gear ready to
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. Your rifle next to you right
Um,
there.
I'm optimistic to the point. I mean, I'm optimistic because I obviously, again, like as a white passing woman, haven't experienced like half of the things that
Yeah,
like most black women or black men in this country have faced. So I still have a lot of energy in me to like fight this fight.
yeah,
And it's like time that we need to tag in, right? It's time that the people that are claiming like Black Lives Matter and like putting it on their Instagram feed and then sitting in their room not doing anything, like
yeah,
it's time to stand up. It's time to like put your boots on and like to hit the streets. Because Biden being in the White House isn't a win for us. Biden being in the White House is just like a little bit of like, okay, he unlocked the door and now we're gonna storm it.
yeah, yeah,
Because that's just that it's just giving us an opportunity to actually do the work. We've had 4 years of a white supremacist, a Nazi in the White House. And that was like the huge barrier that we were facing. So now that we have like less of a Nazi in the White
yeah.
House, it's time to like enter and do the work.
Yeah, I agree. It's less oppression, that's for sure, at the leadership front.
Like a touch. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because it's all just political theater is what this stuff is.
Yeah.
Um, so because I've had conversations with people on the far right that are literally what you're saying on the opposite. So where is there a place where everybody just gets unison, or is that past the point now? It seems
No,
like
it's
everybody's
not.
against each other.
It's not. I'm for liberation of the people. I don't believe in having like a government, and it's kind of similar to people that are like libertarians. I think is like what they name themselves, right? Like
Yeah,
people that are like, don't tread on me, like let me own my land, like that whole thing.
yeah,
Like I'm with it. I'm for it. Let's do that. But they're all the way to the right there because their basic needs have already been met.
yeah.
So on the path to liberation as a whole, we need to make sure that the needs of like black and brown people and under-resourced people and disabled people are also being met before we can all access liberation.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would. I hate the labels, by the way. I know it's the proper way to describe things, but I guess I was explaining to an individual at work where and this is part into the Bitcoin rabbit hole, right? That I just want to decentralize from the major things in this world, right? So I'm like, look, if I take care of my own health and I eat the right way and I work out, I remove myself from the powers of big pharma, right?
Hmm.
If I, Bitcoin, if I, invest in this, fast, hard money asset, and I'm able to hedge inflation and I'm able to get ahead, then I get away from, the banking system, et cetera, et cetera. And then immediately, as I'm finishing up my point, my buddy that I'm talking to comes in and says, "Oh, that's a libertarian." And I was like, "Well, I mean, you can label it as such, but I'm just telling you exactly what I'm trying to accomplish for me and my family." How much do you think all this stuff being thrown around is just labels?
It's just what?
Like labels, like the stigma. Like instead of actually understanding Maria, I'm just gonna say Maria's just far left and put it that
Yeah,
label.
I mean, I think it is labels, but I
Yeah,
think, and I'm not, so I think in like there's like political spectrum, right? You have like
yeah,
communism and you have like libertarianism,
yeah.
and people think that they're like so completely opposite from each other, but it's more like think of it as like a circle, and we're both here, but we need to get through like all of this
Yeah, I
to
like
like
that.
meet here in the middle. And like my fight to get here is like, okay, how do I help Black and brown people? How do we help disabled people? How do we get food in people's hands? Like, how do we meet all of these things so that we can all be unified in our liberation? I don't believe in big pharma either. I'm not here trying to put vaccines in people's arms. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
here to do any of that kind of stuff. I totally believe that like your power and like your freedom is like up to you, but
right.
we can't say that we're this free country when there's so many people on the streets and when there's people that are not actually free.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about the? I don't know if you know much about it. I had a buddy of mine come on the podcast, and he was talking about he went to San Diego and was watching the homeless out there.
Mhm.
And it's like by like every street corner down the street. Now here in Worcester, we see some panhandlers here, but we don't see tents. We don't see these establishments. Um, how much of that is do you feel is just, quote unquote liberal, governance? Because California is what I'm saying is very liberal governance.
Yeah, no, it's cost of living. It's
Okay.
people aren't able to live. We have family that's out in California and San Francisco, and it's
Yep.
it's pretty similar
Is it?
there. In Miami, yeah, in Miami, it's pretty similar. We have so I used to do a lot of work with my church growing up, with like a feeding the homeless program,
Okay.
and we would always like go to downtown, and and that was honestly one of those experiences that made me just be like, this is like so shitty to say, but like, oh wow, people that don't have homes are just like me. Or like we have to recognize that every single person that's in the working class, right? So if you're not the 1%, you are closer to homelessness and poverty than you are to Jeff Bezos, right? And that's
Yeah.
just that's just the reality of the world. Is I am like one paycheck away from not having my home, and that's
Yeah.
very similar for a lot of people that are working class. So I don't think it has to do with like the way that the state is run, like, oh, it's a red state or a blue state or whatever. It's just cost of living has skyrocketed while our minimum wage and our employment pay is staying the same. There's no reason that as a first year teacher, if you really break down the salary of a first year teacher, they get paid minimum wage. They get paid $15 an hour,
Wow.
to teach with a master's degree for most teachers. So
Yeah.
you start looking at things like that and you understand why homelessness happens. And then, so one of the experiences I had when I was feeding the homeless, I was maybe like 15 or 16, and I'll never forget it. There was this man, and I would see him every single week. Right. And when I first started the program, I was like really nervous to like speak to anybody. My mom was like, take off your pearls, don't like talk to anybody,
Yeah.
like that whole kind of thing. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to this man because I see him every week, and you can tell that he's going through something. This man was a doctor. This man
Wow.
was a doctor that got sued, lost his license, his family left, took the house, took the car, took absolutely everything. From one year to the next, this doctor was on the street. So,
Yeah.
and that's, and doctors are like glorified in this country as like, oh, you want to be, at least like as a Spanish person, it's always like, be a doctor, be a
Yeah.
lawyer,
Yeah.
these things. This man was one mistake away from losing everything, and we as a country need to recognize that we're all closer to that than we are to the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. And getting worse. How do you feel about them continuously giving stimulus?
About what?
About like the country continuously giving stimulus now, from not from the point of view of it helping people in need, because I think that's an obvious, but from a point of view of it's gonna become, and it is becoming much 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 more expensive to live if they continue to just continue to print money and print money and print money. So where do you fall in that balance between getting the money to the people so they can do what they can, but also making sure that our children are going to be able to afford to live?
Yeah, I mean, money's fake, right? Like money's fake in this
Yeah.
country. To be completely honest, like the economy is fake. Everything is man-made. We have the ability to give people the basic needs that they need to have. We have the ability. There's an upright. There are more empty homes in California than there are homeless people. So they have every resource that they need to put an unsheltered person in a home. Why aren't they doing that? Because that's loss of revenue, right? So as a country, we have more than enough resources to give people basic income every single month, food budgets every single month, housing every single month. We have these resources, but why aren't we distributing it? Because we have $800 billion a year going to defense budgets to establish military dominance in countries that are not asking us to be there, right?
Yeah.
And again, that boils down to white supremacy. Why is it that there's absolutely no country that has a base in the United States? Why is that? Because America is a police state that believes in empowering itself and inserting itself in countries so that we can establish dominance.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I've heard similar people explain it to me in that fashion, and I do agree that there's some weird stuff going on in that whole intruding in other people's uh, problems. Sometimes is the
It's not even
pretending.
problems. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's making it look like a problem, but it's not really one.
Yeah, I think I read, and obviously the numbers are probably wrong or have changed since then, but I think like one military base costs somewhere near $80 million a year to operate and fund. And a lot of those are in countries that don't want us there. So
Yeah,
$80 million a year just to essentially pay the bills on a building that's empty, just establishing white supremacy across the world while there's people that are hungry and homeless on our country doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, that does kind of show where your priorities are at for sure.
Yeah,
So,
it's just we're a fascist police state, period. Like,
yeah, yeah. I agree with you in many aspects there. So, how did you, besides schools being shut down, how was COVID for you? How was 2020? Did it slow you
um,
down? Did you have to divert anywhere? Was it rough opening the fridges or planning it? I know that's
it was, I think so for me, the hardest part was probably just not being able to like see my family.
yeah,
Like so many people, like my mom is pretty, or my parents, both of them are like pretty high risk and paranoid, obviously, about COVID.
yeah,
So I haven't been able to see them, which was hard. But other than that, like taking it as a blessing, like I've really spent the last year of my life figuring out how I can change the world from my sofa on my phone. And the fridges is like one of the things, but throughout the year, we've really been able to do like so much to aid and help in the community. And just to like establish myself, I guess, a little bit more as like this community organizer. That's actually been really nice because COVID kind of slowed the world down so that I can actually zone in on that.
yeah, yeah. I have one of my favorite authors, Ryan Holiday. He had this concept of alive time versus dead time. And he, throughout the whole year, he kind of kept constantly repeating it, like, "Hey, listen, you could take this time and use it as a lifetime and be able to find yourself, find what you love to do." I think I've had that same 2020. Thankfully, I don't think I was affected by COVID as many other people were,
Mhm.
but I am thankful that because I got lucky, I guess, in a sense. It seems like it's dangerous out there. Um,
Yeah, yep.
yeah, can we talk about censorship and your opinions on being able to censor people on social media? The easy example is Donald Trump, but I don't want to give that example. I'll give you a very easy example. About a year or some change ago, I started something called the $300 startup, and it was basically just a small course that can help anybody start a business in for under $300, right? Because the internet has leveled the playing field. We can do that pretty easy now. So Facebook went and sent me an email and basically said, "Hey, man, long story short, they were saying you're selling fool's gold to the people, and we have to block this account."
Yeah.
So I was moderated and I was cut off, sort of like our president was just cut off. Do you think that if these social media platforms are telling us that this is an open medium and they're obviously making billions off the free information that they give us, should they be allowed to censor somebody out?
I mean, do I think that they should be allowed? No, but it is like a private business, right? So
Sure.
they can like meet their own guidelines. We have to really dissect like who actually owns social media and why they want to be censoring people like you that are giving this amazing resource to the working class to better the quality of their life.
Yeah.
So once you start dissecting and thinking about like, okay, why am I being censored? It's usually because the person, this like larger powerhouse of media that owns Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. They don't want that information to reach the masses, and that's usually what it is. I think for cases, obviously, like Donald Trump, I'm for Twitter. You know, any type of like hate speech and things like that. They're a private business, so they should be able to do that. But I was actually in this is like so random, but I was in like this weird art like back and forth with Maryland State Police over this past year, because I was again on, this is like so random and off topic, I don't know if it is, but I was on Instagram and there was a picture of an effigy, which is basically like it looks like somebody is hanging from a tree, and it looks like a black man, right? It's a stuffing. It was like a scarecrow. Think of it like that way. But this picture shocked me, right? Yeah. So me being the troll that I am, just took this picture. I knew that it was in Maryland because I was reading the comments. Found the house, found the homeowner's wife on Instagram, messaged her. I was like, this needs to get taken down. This whole thing, I called the Maryland Police Department literally every single day, and they said, this is freedom of speech. We don't have the right to tell this man that he can't put a black face effigy hanging on the front of his lawn. So he was protected by the First Amendment in that space. So to be honest, I think when it comes to situations that are like when the things that you're saying are evoking hate, shut it down.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I try to tell people that, you know, they pay for their servers, they pay for their employees, they pay for the, you know, the coding, they pay for all that goes. So yeah, I guess technically they should be able to do that. But it just goes back to the narrative thing, you know. That now who's deciding to, you know, who's the storyteller here? You're becoming a publishing company at that point, which when we signed up and agreed to your crazy terms and condition, you did not tell us that you guys were going to be this. And I guess that's where the middle ground is for me. I mean, I'm not a fan, as we discussed, of social media anyway, so this doesn't really kill me. But it definitely brought back to my awareness the fact that I was blocked for trying to do something good and nobody seemed to care. And then this gentleman was blocked for doing some nasty shit and everybody's just upset about it. I really didn't get that difference.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do think that censorship is like a huge problem in our society. And I think it's curated because they don't want this like information hitting the people. And to be honest, I think going kind of back to the pandemic, the biggest fear that like the government and leadership and people in power have is giving the working class enough of the off time that we had during COVID to be able to research these like social injustices that are happening. That's the greatest fear of people in power, is the working class at rest. That we're constantly being forced to, you know, work and uphold this like life and all of these things. And our superpower is really the superpower of the masses, which is why we saw like Black Lives Matter in such numbers over the summer, because so many people lost their job and were radicalized by the lack of support that their government gave them. So what did we do? We organized and we hit the streets, and that's the people in power's greatest fear.
Yeah, I agree. The people historically have always spoken, and I actually think that's what the political theory is for, right? It's if you keep them divided, there's no way in hell that they can get together, and there's no way in hell that they can overrun us. I guess I agree with that 1,000%. You're right. So I grew up in Worcester, so did my wife, and we always think about that we should be more community oriented. How can my wife and I do more during the day to be more community oriented?
I'm so happy you asked. This is my biggest thing with mutual aid. Mutual aid does not have to be this like well orchestrated, like getting donations and finding volunteers. Literally make a couple peanut butter sandwiches, go in your car, get to know the community members that are hungry, give out the food that you have, even just getting to know people that are in need down the block from your house, right? Yeah. That is like our biggest thing that we can do. So do I think it's valuable if you're like financially able to like donate to these organizations that are helping? Absolutely. But our superpower as humans is really just human contact and connection. So just look at your community, figure out what it needs. And if you have the privilege to provide that, do it.
Gotcha. This is already the first step. Is this these fridges? I think this is an incredible product. Not a product, an idea, a project.
Yeah.
I really didn't know it was a thing. I mean, call me naive. I was just like, A network of fridges.
No, it's new. It's fairly new in this in like the United States it's fairly new.
Yeah.
Obviously in like Europe they have
So
much
cool.
stronger like social safety nets. So community fridges have been established for a while in Europe. In America we have programs like farm co-ops for like families that have hard time accessing nutritious food. So there's already just kind of things like that. But what we're doing, kind of like what we touched on earlier, is putting like connecting the cultural aspect to food, plopping these fridges down in like a super dope way in the middle of a community that really needs it, and just filling it with the food that the people want.
With the sauce. With
Yeah,
the
with the sauce, a
ultimate.
little spice in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the people that are, let's just say, extremely introverted and they don't talk to their neighbors, then what's the benefits of a strong community? Why should they even contribute if they were to be asking that question and listening now?
Why should they contribute? Because
Yeah,
that
because
it's our human instinct. It's our
right,
human instinct to connect, right? Like there's a reason you could be super introverted, but there's a reason why you feel those butterflies when you watch like one of those feel good stories
right.
online, right? Like there's a reason why people are really depressed, and it's because of lack of like really like good human connection. We've lost track of that. So you could be introverted. You don't need to talk to the person that's unsheltered. Throw a coat in your car, ask them if they need a coat, and give it to them. You're going to make that person's day. So it's just about taking action, right? If you're like a decent human being, take action.
Yeah, I do get into that sometimes too. I think a lot of people just forget the human aspect. I know that sounds very weird, but
Yeah, no, it's, yeah.
yeah, people throw like, like I said earlier, labels and they throw ideas and
Mhm.
then, they look at you when you object and then you just tell them, hey man, somebody shouldn't get shot 19 times because it's unhuman for somebody to get shot 19 times.
Yeah,
Like
and
it's not about
don't you
black,
feel
white. I don't care. Yeah, I don't
yeah.
care if it's a white dude that got shot 19 times. I don't think I don't even I'm not a hunter, but I don't even think deer get shot 19 times.
No, there's a villainization against Black and Brown people, specifically Black people in our community. It's happened since slavery.
Yeah,
If you really start, I won't go into it because it's
sure.
gruesome, but I
Yeah.
encourage your listeners to really read up on the history of slavery and the things that these kidnappers did to Black bodies. It's disgusting. It's atrocious. And that kind of action, right? I don't know if you're like familiar with something called generational trauma,
A
but
little
it's
bit.
basically like we carry the trauma of our ancestors, right? White people have it. White people that have ancestry lines of colonizers carry this like inner hate towards Black and Brown people that now they're like, I'm not racist, but it comes out in so many different ways now. You don't need to be wearing a KKK like cape for you to be
Right.
considered racist. It's really about like your actions and just the things that you're thinking. And within that generational trauma, a lot of most Black people are carrying that trauma too. So it's really important that we're like digesting that and really like sitting and reflecting with like those uncomfortable feelings that we have sometimes. One of the protests I went to in Cambridge a couple years ago, this amazing woman, I forget her name, but she did a lot of work with like inner city children. And she said when she first got into this work, she was like on the T, right? So she was waiting to get on the train and she saw a group of Black boys huddled together. And she said, why was I scared? Why was my instinct of a group of Black children?
Yeah.
Why was my instinct to like clutch my purse and to be worried? So she said that was the first moment she walked into that group of boys and she said, what's up? Like, how are you
Yeah.
guys? What do you need? And they said, we're trying to figure out how to get back home. We need money to get on the bus, right? Like a couple cents to get on this train. She gave it to them. But we really have to start dissecting, why are we so scared of other human beings?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a big task for a lot of people because I think reflection is a lost art. I don't think people can actually ask themselves those questions and want to
Yeah.
stomach the answer because sometimes the answer is a very nasty answer.
Mm-hmm.
I've had those situations as well where I look in the mirror and say, "Hey, man, why did I behave that way in that situation?" And then it hurts. You got to dig deep, but
Yeah.
in the pain, you find yourself.
Yeah, and I'm sure you experienced it too, like growing up in a Spanish household. There's a lot of like inner racism within the Spanish community. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
grew up with it too. Like seeing other immigrants from other countries as less than, right? Or seeing people from other countries as like, oh, they're dirty, or like you, like they're ghetto, like that kind
Yeah.
of language, and stigmatizing literally an other person that is just like me. That story is no different than mine, but I grew up with those stories in my head. So now as an adult, I need to do a lot of work to like destigmatize myself on it. And I'm a pretty progressive person, and
Yeah.
I am saying that I have racial biases. So there is absolutely no way
Yeah.
that somebody that grew up in a middle class household, going to an all white school, surrounded by all white culture, it doesn't have interracial biases. Like every single person in this world needs to be putting in the work.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, most people don't want to do that
I know, yeah.
until it hits home. I mean, it's one of those
Send them,
situations.
send them my way. I'll radicalize them.
Well, definitely, and they should be. But it's the tunnel vision. It's like me personally, I love being not married to my thoughts, and sometimes I go expecting that other people behave the same way, and people are glued to their thoughts. They don't even want to hear what you're saying. Most of the time, they obviously in front of you are turned off. Like you see the lights go off when you start talking about certain things, and I don't know. I want to change that. I don't think I can change that. That's just the way people are.
Yeah,
But
it's that's privilege. They're
yeah,
privileged, right?
yeah,
Because they've never been in situations that have been uncomfortable to them. Put that person with uncomfortable thoughts in a room full of people that don't think like them. They're going to experience what it's like to be a minority really,
right.
really quickly. So it's just, you got to start. People need to start reaching out and stop being so scared of like things that they're comfortable with.
Yeah. Are you big on mental health therapy? Do you do any of that stuff? Or
Oh yeah, man, I'm a consistent therapy goer.
yeah, me too. Once a week.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
go once a month now, but when I suffer with depression, not suffer, I have depression.
yeah,
Um, and like in my adulthood, since I became a parent, really bad anxiety
yeah.
that just kind of like came out of nowhere. So kind of going through that, and I had kind of a rocky like teenage life, so
Okay.
definitely doing a lot of like work with that. But I've definitely grown a lot, and I think mental health is like humongous.
Yeah, and I think back to the culture and at least in the Spanish world, that was kind of like ignored, right? Like my parents
Yeah,
never told me, "Hey, you may need some help with your thoughts." They were
yeah,
just like, "Figure it out, dude. I mean, we're too busy or whatever it is." And it
yeah,
wasn't until I got to maybe 29, or 30. I'm 34 now, so about 29 when I was like, "I can't do this. I need some help. I need some place to go." And ever
yeah,
since then, a big proponent. Because I think most minorities don't know or care about therapy. They think it's foolish. I could. I hate saying this term, but I could hear one of my buddies right now in my head saying, "Man, therapy's gay, bro." And
yeah. It's stigmatized. It's stigmatized in the Spanish community. My dad, he has like a lot. He's kind of like over. Has worked through a lot of depression, right?
yep,
And when his mother passed away, I was like in middle school. It was like so powerful. One of the last things that she told him was start seeing a therapist, because she in silence suffered for so long. She was a Cuban immigrant. She came to this country, whether it was that it was stigmatized or she just couldn't access mental health resources. So like one of the last things that she told my dad was start seeing a therapist, because it runs in our family, and this is gonna overwhelm your life if you don't get it handled.
yeah,
So that's really powerful. So he's been like in therapy as well. My whole family at this point is like in therapy, which is
yep.
so funny to me, because like you said, growing up it was so stigmatized, and it's like, you're sad, here, eat something, I don't know, like why are you sad?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Eat something was the go-to for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Here's some home cuisine.
Yeah,
Yeah, all of my my immediate family and a little bit of my external family basically took my lead, and I was one of the first few ones to go into therapy. But even my kids now, I have two teenagers. I have a 17-year-old and I have a 14-year-old, and yeah, I try to I tell them that they're probably living through one of the toughest times to be a teenager. The stuff that they're
yeah,
going through, I couldn't even imagine when I was a teenager, and I thought I had it tough. But really, what they're with the comparison game and with the social media game and the way schools have turned out and the popularity contest and all that stuff and the depression, I got both my teenagers into therapy. I think they're doing a fantastic job with it. And anybody who listens to this podcast absolutely knows that they should get therapy. They should read a lot. I'm not just gonna put everything on therapy. I think you discover a lot about yourself when you've seen that people in history have gone through it as well,
hmm
especially people that you may look up to, mentors, leaders in the past. and I found Stoic philosophy. I don't know if you're big on Stoic philosophy.
Mm-mm.
Well, I think to fast track Stoic philosophy, I think it was the origins of what we know now as CBD therapy,
Oh, CBT.
CBT therapy.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's basically, control the things you can control, that whole aspect of things or whatever. So I really got into the old Stoics, the old, Greek philosophy and those things. And I think that's really helped me check my thoughts and be able to function, because I
Yeah.
think we get overloaded easy.
Yeah, for sure. And I like going back to like the teaching stuff.
Yeah.
I do that a lot in my classroom just because it's something. Depression is something that I suffered with, and anxiety is something that I constantly suffer with. So I'm always using that kind of like mental health language with my students. They're always like encouraged to check in on themselves. For me, and just kind of the type of school that I'm really privileged to work at, we prioritize the child's well-being before academics. So in my classroom, if you are not in the right headspace, you're not going to retain any of the information that we're about to talk about. So if I have a kid, like I had a kid the other day that came in and he slept the entire morning, and everyone was like, that's not fair. Like he's missing out on work and like whatever. And it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to wake him up? Like his body doesn't feel good. And it's so important for us to teach kids how to listen to their bodies, because then they grow up and they're an in-tuned adult, right?
Yeah.
Our generation, especially first generation immigrants, we're so detached from our how we're feeling because we're constantly on hustle mode. And it's
Yeah.
really important that we pause and we check in, because there's no hustle without health, right? Health has to be like the number one thing.
Right. I love that. I never thought about it that way. Always hustling. It kind of.
Always. It's nonstop, because as like a Spanish person especially, we are proving ourselves on an absolutely daily basis, right? I have to prove that I am the overqualified for the job. I have to prove, because I worked so hard to earn my seat at that table. I need to make sure that I am at that table and my spot is not going anywhere. But in order to do that, you really need to be in like the right headspace, because if you get to that point at the table and you're not in the right headspace, that's not going to last long, right? You're
Right.
not going to be able to withstand that. It's not a sustainable position to be in. So definitely check in on yourself.
I agree. I love it. I could do this all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, send the people to where they got to go so they can learn more about the Worcester Community Fridges, how they can help. I am going to put all the links in the description because I do feel that my audience is the perfect audience to contribute to this. But
Yep.
if you give them a call to action, where they should go.
Yeah, so they we're really active on social media. So Instagram at Woo Fridge, and then on Facebook, if they want to join our private Facebook group of volunteers, it's Worcester Community Fridges. And then in my Instagram, in my bio, there's a link, and they can kind of just figure out from there like where to donate and how to volunteer. Right now, we have a GoFundMe up, and we've already raised the support in this community has been like overwhelming. So we raised almost $1,700 in 2 weeks.
Nice.
It's absolutely crazy. So our goal was $1,000 to plant the fridge, get what we need to set it up. So any donations that we get going forward is going to go towards a savings account. So when the food is running low, we can just go to the grocery store and refill it. So that's kind of the goal right now, is just saving up money so that we can fill our fridge and keep it as like a sustainable resource for the community.
So fantastic. January 31st is the first one.
Yep, January 31st, fantastic pizza, 910 Main Street. Shout out to the owner, Saket. He is absolutely amazing. I put a call to action on this Facebook group called Worcester Mutual Aid. And I said, any business owners that would be down for this idea? He was the first person to hit me up. We had it negotiated within a week. Like just an amazing, amazing person. Support Fantastic Pizza, 910 Main
Definitely.
Street.
Definitely do. Maria, I have gotten so much from this conversation. I don't want this to be the last time you and I speak, because
Yeah,
not only do my wife and I want to contribute more, I think your cause is super righteous, and I think you're the perfect person to push that cause. This was a great conversation. Thank you for fighting the fight. Thank you for
thank you
being
for
so
having
righteous.
me.
Yeah,
Thank you
this was
for letting
incredible.
me spew all my radical thoughts for the
Oh,
last
I,
hour.
I I love it. Yeah, the thing that I used to call this the $300 startup, and then I was like, look, I'm tired of just forcing people to talk about business, right? Like the really cool thing about podcasting is that we can have a conversation and the nuance of humans, right? Like how you
Yeah,
feel, how I feel, and this is just another example of that.
love that.
If somebody listening doesn't like what you have to say, they have the ability to shut it right off, right?
Yeah.
And if they want to listen to it, they're gonna get gems of value in gold. And for every guest that comes on, there should be allowed that stage, you know. But either way, I appreciate everything you're doing.
We will be talking soon. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
As always, another great conversation. I appreciate you guys for listening. Maria is a perfect example of how to give back to your community. And I think nowadays, with the state of the world, we should all be more community-oriented based. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe so I can continue to have the conversations I love to have, and you can continue to get the conversations you love to listen to. As always, guys, take care. Later.